I think the senator needs an agenda.
Oh, we got printed versions. I think I've got it.
You need an agenda.
Chair Goins, you are live and may call the meeting to order.
Good afternoon. I thank you all for coming. This is the first subcommittee on social equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's August 31st, and I want to call this meeting to order. And so there is a roll call. Unfortunately, I don't know who's in the meeting, who's supposed to be here. That's unfortunate. Amber, do I have a list of attendees?
The roll call
Should
would
I have
be
it?
for the subcommittee members.
Okay. So if I could have each subcommittee member say that they're here, and then we will start. So Senator Harris?
Here.
Tina Ullman?
Here.
Kima Ogden?
Here. Hi, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Attorney General Ford?
He is not present.
All right. And that's everyone. So can I proceed without Attorney General Ford?
Chair Goins, yes, you may.
All right, thank you. So we will open it up for public comment. If you have public comment right now, if you would just come to this seat right here and have your comment on the record, this would be the time to do that. No public comment, we'll proceed. What I'd like to do first is have the next agenda item is item 2. And what I'd like to do is have the subcommittee members introduce themselves. I want to make sure that the people that are watching and listening know who you are and also know your contributions to the industry as a whole. So we will start with Senator Harris and then Ms. Tina Ullman and then Kima Ogden.
Okay. I'm Dallas Harris. I'm the state senator in District 11, which is the southwest part of Clark County. And I've been working on these issues since I first got appointed in 2019 with Commissioner Goins. And so it's a pleasure to see this subcommittee come to fruition and to be here with you all. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Tina Ullman. I am the Director of Brands for the Source Dispensary, the President and Co-founder of the Chamber of Cannabis, a consumer for 15 years, an activist for 3. I'm very passionate about making Nevada one of the most thriving and inclusive states in the nation for cannabis industry. I've been involved in activism specifically for cannabis for about 3 years, building relationships with my political leaders and judicial leaders, and then taking that information and educating my peers and colleagues in the industry, as well as consumers, on how we can get more involved, share our solutions and ideas, and eventually get to a place like this. So very happy to be here, and yes, thank you.
Kima, Ms. Ogden.
Hi, my name is Kima Ogden. I am an owner of Top Notch, the health center, which is a local dispensary here. Been one of the first to open up medically and then recreationally. One of the only minority female owners in the state of Nevada, African-American owners, that is. And, you know, been doing social inclusion and advocacy work for many years as well. Worked with Doctors for Cannabis Regulations on regulating and adult use nationally with that organization, with also social inclusion and whatnot. So, and worked with several other organizations for this very reason. Very passionate about the industry, and thank you guys all for having us on the committee.
Thank you very much. And I'm Aisha Goins, and I'm the subcommittee chair. I have been in the marketplace since 2013. And social equity and inclusion is not just what I do, but it is my passion. I have spent many hours, time, and years insisting that this conversation be had. And so here we are. There's nothing greater than to do the work and have the hope and see it come to fruition. It is not just my pleasure to serve my community, but it is an honor to serve my community. I don't have to do this work. I get to do this work. And so I'm looking forward to what comes out of this board. And as we move forward, I want to just do some housekeeping. This is a very sensitive subject. Some of these conversations I know will trigger some people and hit some points. I want to make sure that we are respectful with each other and that we honor the people that have given their time to this space. I want to just, as a housekeeping space, make sure that we are, when we use the words Black and Indigenous people of color, that we don't abbreviate it, that we honor those people by saying those names and not using the initials. By all means, be clear in what you're saying, but I also want to make sure that we're not using the word Black market that has negative connotations. We can use the word legacy market, use the words illicit market, and then also as it relates to African American and Latin people, let's be sure that we're using those names and that we're not abbreviating them when we're talking. But I also want to just do a land acknowledgement because we are going to be talking about Indigenous persons. And so I want to honor this space. And if, give me a second. And we wish to acknowledge and honor the Indigenous communities of this region and recognize that we are situated on traditional homelands of the Nuwuvi Southern Paiute people. We offer gratitude to the land itself for those who have stewarded it for the generations and for the opportunity to study, learn, work, and be in community with this land. We encourage everyone in this space to engage in continued learning about the Indigenous people who work and live on this land since time immemorial, including the Las Vegas Paiute tribe and the Moapa Band of Paiutes, and about this historical and present realities of colonialism. I just want to make sure that because we are talking about this space, I want to give that honor. I don't want to ever take for granted that this is our space. So moving forward, we will move into, if there are no questions about the housekeeping. All right, moving forward to item 3, and we will be interpreting of AB 34841, Section 9. That is a consumption lounge bill. And that is the reason why we're here right now, is because we want to be talking about how that language has appeared in that bill. So I'm going to just read the language. And my apologies, I'm nervous. I know everybody said I shouldn't be nervous. I am anyway. Give me just a second and I will pull this up. And I'm reading it as enrolled. And I just think it's important to just talk about this component first. Section 9 says, Aisha. My apologies, I'm usually a whole lot more ready for these things, but social equity applicant means an applicant for the issuance of renewal of an adult use cannabis establishment licensed for an independent cannabis consumption lounge who has been adversely affected by provisions of previous laws which criminalize activity relating to cannabis as determined by the board in accordance with the regulations adopted pursuant to Section 11 of this act. Such adverse effects may include, without limitation, adverse effects on an owner or officer of the applicant. And so what I first want to do as we are getting started is talk about our own personal interpretations of that section. So I'm going to leave it open, and then if no one talks, then I will call on someone.
I'll go.
Thank you.
I've been to law school. So although the word isn't in there, I think the point really here is disproportionately affected, right? I mean, everybody, all groups have gone to jail for selling dope, right? But what I think we're really trying to get at is those who have been affected disproportionately, where those effects have kind of weighed on the communities a little bit more significant than others. And so, as we have this conversation, we can't just think about everybody who's been affected. That negates, I think, the whole purpose of us being here.
Senator Harris, if you don't mind, could you kind of explain what disproportionate is? Because sometimes we use words and we get in the habit of using them and people don't really know what that means. Do you mind kind of explaining that? Not Webster's, but.
Yeah, so if I can, I'll explain by definition, by example, which usually is not the best way to give a definition. But, let's say theoretically, we know that African Americans and, or let's say we know all races, right, use marijuana at the same rates. However, if you look at arrest rates, one group may be represented higher than they are in the general population. And that suggests that then there's some disproportionate effect or disproportionate enforcement, at least, on that particular community.
I appreciate that explanation. Tina, Ms. Ullman.
Yes, I agree. Disproportionately affected and gone down from generation to generation, which then affects the community, the families, the upbringing of those children whose parents were affected, and it's just a domino effect until we are here today with now having the opportunity to give licenses, and then those licenses going to people that don't meet those needs like they did originally 4 years ago. So I think this bill says that we're going to change that and say specifically who that is changed for.
Member Ogden.
I agree with both Senator Harris and Tina as well. Disproportionate representation is very, something that's very crucial. It needs to be addressed in this industry. And your guys' definition is right on point, I think. Interpretation.
I agree. I also want to lean in to say that I've been having conversations with the community about Section 9 specifically and how will that be interpreted. And one of the things I want to point out is that specifically it says cannabis policies. And so that's one of the things that I, just want to always draw attention to is, there are so many people, as Senator Harris, Member Harris has said, there's so many people that have been affected by the war on drugs, and Member Ullman also generationally. But I always want to make sure that we are talking about past cannabis policies as we are moving forward and we're exploring what equity could look like. I did send out some homework, a little bit of homework as we move into agenda item 4, equity and consumption lounges specifically. I did send out a little bit of homework, and for the people who are here, I want to just say on the record what the homework was. And one of the questions, because as we're talking about equity, I want to, this is a conversation that is being had nationwide. It's not just being had in Nevada. Nevada was one of the first 9 states to legalize cannabis without an equity program. And so that gave us, we were at a disadvantage, but it actually put us at an advantage, because what we're able to do is take a look at what all has happened and then say, this is what we don't want to happen here. Right, Nevada is always leading in policy and regulations, and here is another opportunity for us to lead out and really show and put our best foot forward and make those recommendations to the Cannabis Compliance Board as they are putting regulations together. I also want to point out that this is also one of the first times that equity has been made a designation in industry in Nevada, period. And so as we are looking at what this looks like, I want us to be thinking about how what we say right now, these recommendations could end up as consistent policy across the board in industries across the board. I want to weigh heavy on everyone, as heavy as it's been weighing on me. I want to ensure that I'm not the only one thinking of it all. But, and because of that, because we have a unique opportunity to have these conversations on the record, I wanted to challenge. I'm a coach. That's what I do by trade. And so because of that, I'm always giving out homework. It's just kind of who I am. And so the subcommittee had homework. And one of the things that I asked for them to do is to answer these questions. How do we achieve and sustain equity? So not just thinking about how we, how the Cannabis Compliance Board could have an equitable program, but also how can we sustain that program? What does sustainability look like? And then how will we be identifying equity applicants? And I've taken my glasses on and off, my age is showing, but I can't read barely, you know. And what is equitable? What does sustainability look like as it relates to the Nevada Cannabis Lounges? And how will we fairly distribute 10 licenses? So these are some of the things that we'll be going over today. And I want to, and because this is equity and consumption lounges. So let's just talk a little bit about how do we achieve and sustain equity? Has anybody have thoughts on that? You didn't do your homework? Listen, I'm a firm coach too. I hold you accountable. I know that you've thought about it, Member Harris, Senator.
I mean, intentionally.
Right.
Right. I think being here is a good first step. Mm-hmm. We have to give it some thought and put an effort into it. That's really generally often all it takes is to be conscious about the decisions that you're making. And that in itself often leads to great results as opposed to just kind of letting things go as they've always been done. That's where, these kind of ingrained disparities and things like that perpetuate themselves. Mm-hmm, and so, you get it by being intentional. And I think that's what we will all do here. As a legislator, I think you maintain it by putting it in black letter law, right? I mean, the more I think we see this type of directive being required from the top down, the more successful we'll be in ensuring that it's always there and always at the forefront. You require it to be there. You require it to be at the forefront. You require it to be part of every discussion, right? That's a good first step to making sure that it stays that way. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And doesn't change with leadership.
Member Oman?
Yes. So I think it starts by us being here right now, by having a CCB that supports comments from the public and solutions and ideas from the field. In any industry, the best ideas come from the field. And I think it's important for people to share those ideas and turn them into solutions. Thinking outside the box, we have such a great state. We're number one in hospitality, tourism, nightlife, adult life, and now we have the opportunity to be the best in cannabis. So where can we tap into those resources of already successful, sustainable businesses? And through our own universities. We have 2 great universities here. We could be partnering with the master's program, get some MBA graduates, and really make it so that our whole state is coming together and we can be the example for other states. And then putting it in policy again, like the senator said, and being open to revising that policy based on what happens with the economy.
Member Ogden?
I think you made a good point early on when you mentioned that we've been able to kind of see what other states have done. I think reaching out, doing some research, reaching out to legislative officials in other states that have actually done well in this area, and we see it working, like Tina said, and being open to revisiting it, because this is kind of I feel like this is going to be something that needs tweaking. And as you see it going and happening, you make adjustments so that it works and continues to work as the industry grows. There's going to be unexpected issues that come up. It's new, so there's a lot of times things pop up. So I think just being open to that, reaching out to others who have done this, who are doing well, and just doing a lot of research. And you guys hit it right on the head as well, sitting here and then banging it out and doing our due diligence. So that's what I think it's gonna take.
So what I have is, from what you guys have said, is that we need resources. So I want to just kind of expand a little bit more on that. When we talk about resources for equity applicants, what are we thinking when we say that? I know that's a broad conversation, but it's in these conversations that we narrow down what the expectation is for our equity applicants. So when we talk about resources, what are we thinking?
Money, mentorship.
Know-how, education, big part of it should be education. A lot of people just don't know what to do first.
I agree. And as it relates to money, we always say money is the greatest equalizer, right? When we talk about money, what do we think that our equity applicants will need assistance in? And I'm asking these questions because these are going to be the questions that we'll have to answer as we move forward. So I'm just, this isn't what I want to take to the CAC as a whole to vote on, but I want to explore this now so that we can expand on that and then make our recommendations to the CCB. And if you guys don't understand how this flows, this is your first meeting, I probably should have said that, excuse my ignorance. The CAC's responsibility is the subcommittee's responsibility are to come up with recommendations that will be then brought up to the Cannabis Advisory Commission to vote on for recommendations to the Cannabis Compliance Board. So the subcommittees are, the important component is to have something to give to the full CAC board to make as hard recommendations to the Cannabis Compliance Board as they are putting regulations and making interjections into the cannabis business place. But we are only advisors, and then this subcommittee is where we narrow down that advice. All right. So again, as we're talking about money, as it relates to our equity applicants, what are we thinking about? How do we allocate this money and what monies are we talking about? Because this stuff is all broad, it's conversational, but when we want to see our equity applicants supported, how does that look like to us?
I mean, a simple version is points on an application. Some additional weight based on, whatever factors we may determine are appropriate. I think geography is important. We don't want all of the licensees in one location, or whether that be all in one location that's been disproportionately affected or not any in those particular locations, right? So, I think that we need to make sure that we are encouraging the Cannabis Compliance Board to pay attention to these factors on the application. And sometimes that in itself is giving some additional weight to these applicants without saying, give you 2 points if you're black.
That's good. That's really good. Member Olman, I see you. Go ahead.
So in regards to your question earlier, how do we get the money? So I first think starting with looking at, once these lounges open, where that tax dollars is going, so we can put it into a fund. So when we're sitting here 2.5 years from now talking about micro businesses, hopefully we don't have that conversation. We've already set it up, so our future self is really proud of our past self, right? And we're feeding that. And then capital investors. I mean, we obviously, if you're not rich, you probably don't know rich folks. But the rich folks here in Nevada, that's where we would call on the business owners, the developers, the people that are already profiting from cannabis to get into their circles and networks and bring venture capitalists and investors and people that have the bandwidth to bring their funds to these applicants. So making sure that we're publicizing that and communicating that so that every person in the state of Nevada gets that information. Yeah, those are the two biggest ones, I think, for money.
Member Ullman, you said something I just want to kind of ask you to expand on, because we're talking about consumption lounges and those social equity applicants that will be coming up. That is our immediate concern.
Mhm.
How do we position ourselves financially, or excuse me, how do we allow financial support for those equity applicants? How do you see that?
Yes. So I think tapping into community resources like business trade associations and again, current cannabis business owners that might have a network of wealth that they have seen them doing well here in the industry and maybe want to connect those people with the licensees. Also thinking a little outside the box. You know, there's a great show called Shark Tank, and they get to present their concept and rich folks give them their money. And I think that would be awesome to, partner with someone like UNLV and have that. Also looking at how do we increase funds coming in from cannabis right now? Most of that money all goes to the schools and a couple other places, but if we, let's say, increase the daily limit and increase taxes, then get those taxes to go to the licensees. So
I want just a little bit of housekeeping, because I do see you guys are hand raised. You want to make sure that you're taking a note, and at the end of our meeting, you'll have an opportunity to put on public comment. So if what we're saying is exciting you and you're passionate about it, make a note for it so that you can absolutely have it on the record. At the end of the meeting, I will absolutely make it available for public comment. Member Ogden?
I personally don't think raising taxes and things, the industry is already taxed very high. It's hard for some people to even make money because of the way it's taxed federally, not being legal and whatnot. I personally think that going to the state and the city for grants, for support programs, they get money. There's a lot of money, like you said, in the funds from the taxes already. Allocating that money for these programs, breaking that out, because a lot of the resources need to be given out up front a lot of times at first. It costs a lot of money to even apply at times and to compete in this market. Once that happens, you can waste a lot of money just applying. So I think that initial part, trying to get grant funding, try to get programs funded by the city or state with that grant, with that tax money that's already there, encouraging kickbacks or incentives for companies to participate in these programs. Unfortunately, the cannabis industry does not, can't write off grants. They can't write off any charitable contributions, anything like that. Trying to work through some of those issues for the organizations to want to participate and support. I think it needs to come around to a community. Because one thing, once a person does get into the industry, they're in the industry. You don't want to keep punishing someone for being in the industry. They got to keep paying for programs and stuff. That's not an incentive. Once they get there, you're not setting them up to succeed. You're now adding taxes and things. So I look back at the city, the state, the county, what's already happening, what's already in place, see if we can get some grant funding, some programs set up to support the initial part of this, to fund people even applying, things of that nature, resources to start.
Yeah, I like all of that. And then as it relates to education, how do we see education rolling out? Because one of the things that has came up in the some of the research that has been done is that a lot of the business owners just don't have business acumen. And so how do we, because you said education, Member Ullman said education, how does that look for equity applicants? What are we thinking needs to happen to create a sustainable program?
Well, I think there's a model out there already in Nevada. You and I chatted about it in 2019 for minority-owned small businesses I think it's run out of the Governor's Office of Economic Development. That's essentially what they do, is provide information, education, assistance with applying for state procurement grants. Right now, we don't have the state purchasing marijuana quite yet, so we can't go that far, but I think there's a lot that we can take away from that disadvantaged business entity model when it comes to at least the education piece.
I absolutely agree. That is Senator Neal's baby, and we're talking about the GROW program. If you aren't, and even to lean in a little bit, is Senator Harris was successful in ensuring that there is language almost identical to the GROW program in AB 533. Is that the right bill number? I think that's the right bill number. All these numbers. But yes, and so I agree, we're moving into a space where that program can be activated for this. Any other ideas? Any other education ideas?
Continuing education, I think, is very important. Making sure we're not setting people up with the gotcha, looking for the problem, which Kima alluded to as well. And I think so many times, like, if we're instilling fear in these new licensees, then it's just not, defeating the purpose of what we're trying to do. So making sure that the communication is there of what they need to be doing, the expectation is there. Possibly, if there is something that isn't done correctly, a reduction in fines or some kind of other ramification. And making sure these businesses are of scale. So people might have wild dreams, but making sure that they're also set up for success, possibly looking at their finances, things we don't usually provide, but this is a whole new space, and I don't think anyone wants to see it do anything but be successful.
I love the idea of saying that we should see, instead of just finding them, there should be an opportunity for education instead of. I think that's a brilliant idea, and that's thinking completely out of the box. And one of the biggest things you said is communicating expectations. The licensing process is a whole mystery, not just here, but across the nation, right? We have to be better at taking the wool away from everyone's eyes and being, I know that the CCB is working towards full transparency, and I appreciate that. But as we move into the new licensing process, I want to see some better transparency, right, in the application process. Really saying, hey, this is what's expected, this is what it looks like, not necessarily having to interpret all of the things, because I think that's where we lead to some misunderstandings. What do you think, Member Ogden?
Yeah, I really appreciate that we're talking about continuation of support, because one thing I found being a minority in the industry is, everyone's looking at how to help people get to the place that I'm at. But once you're there, we're just kind of thrown to there's no support going forward, and everything else is for social equity applicants or new coming in people and whatnot, but I'm still at a disadvantage. And I still, as an owner, so even when you get into the industry, you still need support. You need access to, have this, just like other industries, you get, certain companies have to have a certain amount of contracts for minority contracts, things of that nature to help compete. So I really like that this committee's kind of thinking long-term and not just how do we get everybody in, because that to me is not going to help anything, like you said earlier, not everybody knows business. And unfortunately, a lot of people who want to be in here don't know business. You get people from all walks of life. They just want to do something new and different. And so I think it's really important that we focus on the long-term sustainability when it comes to being a social equity owner.
Member Ogden, you said something also that I thought is very innovative, and that is incentivizing scenarios for current business owners. And, there are so many, in a lot of industries, there's a lot of incentives for business owners to contract diversity, and that is, there's an incentive space for that. and as we move into consumption lounges, because these 10 applicants will have to partner with dispensaries, I think it would be great to offer an incentive for those dispensaries to do business with those equity applicants, and even moving forward as we're trying to think about equity and, think about equity wholly for the cannabis industry, and how do we introduce new joint venture businesses, and I'm not focusing on that, just talking about it for subject matter. But as we're looking at bringing in support businesses and joint venture opportunities, I think offering incentivizing the current applicants to do business could be an advantage, right? Because now we're not putting the license. I had never considered this till just now, but now because there aren't incentives, it doesn't put the licensee at a space that would encourage them to reach out, to reach in, right? There's no encouragement for that because they're taking all the responsibility and the accountability anyway, so they would just do it themselves. That relates to all the support businesses. Why would if I know that what you're doing could possibly get me fined, I'm going to do it myself. But if there is a place to actually say, hey, here's an incentive program if you use a support marketing service, because it's a minority-owned business, I think that could be huge. I think that could be huge for diversity as we proceed. So I know that the team is listening and making notes. That's one of the best parts of what we're doing. We're being visited. Am I on time?
Hi, Madam Chair. Ashish Bala from the AG's office. You are on time. And I just wanted to step in really briefly because I wanted to remind everyone that I know this is very much related to the social equity applicant definition, but the agenda item is really about the interpretation of that. And I think we want to just try and focus today's conversation on trying to interpret Section 9 of AB 341, although I completely understand that this plays into a larger conversation about incentives. But I just wanted to say a little 2 cents. I think we should just try and focus a little bit more on 341 specifically.
I'm actually in agenda item 4, and we're talking about equity in consumption lounges.
My apologies.
That's okay. Okay.
So please just disregard that. But I just wanted to make sure we're staying on the agenda. That's it. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. So yes, thank you for keeping me on point. We are just for reference, we are in agenda item 4. And this is the conversation for equity and the consumption lounges. And we are discussing the homework that was sent out, which was how do we achieve and sustain equity? And that's what we are discussing right now. I do want to move on to the next part of our homework is identifying equity applicants as it relates to consumption lounges. What are we thinking is going to, there's 10 applications that will be made available, and having identifying markers is going to be necessary. How are we thinking about that?
I guess I'd like to maybe learn a little bit more about how other agencies do it.
Okay.
Because this is not a new thing. For example, the Nevada Department of Transportation has to give a certain amount of percentage of business to minority-owned, disadvantaged, veteran-owned businesses, and they have some mechanism for taking in applications, verifying ownership, and things like that. So I don't know. I think we can kind of pick it up off the shelf, hopefully. But I'd like to, I don't know if anybody here has the insight or if the DAG has any insight. But I'd like to know a little bit more about how other agencies do it, and we should just copy that.
Yes, I hadn't considered that, but yes, and then just well, I always say R&D, rip off and duplicate, but definitely take a look at what that is and then adjust, make our suggestions based on adjustment. I think that's a smart, what were you going to say, member?
Yes, definitely that, always best practices. And as we spoke of before, folks who've been adversely affected by cannabis policy, folks that have grown up and lived in neighborhoods specifically affected by drug policy as well, because I know this is specific to cannabis, but if you lived in a neighborhood that had all types of drugs, maybe you didn't necessarily have a parent, family member, or yourself go to prison, but still it's perpetual and getting out of that cycle. So yeah.
So I do want to just point out that when we're talking about equity applicants for the consumption lounges, the section 9, as we have been reminded, but I just want to go back to it says disproportionately from the cannabis policies. So I just want to be, when we're talking about this, I want to be specific, but as we move forward, after we've done this and we move forward, we'll be talking about how that looks as a whole for the industry. But you said something I wanted to just kind of bring back is how will we, this is concerning for me, but when we're talking about these specific 10 applicants, how can we, what would we ask for them to say that they have been generationally affected?
I think it's a case where you almost have to speak or read a letter, if you will, from those applicants, and you have to dive in a little bit deeper than you would if it was an applicant for any other business. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be different because that's not really how sometimes most business works. But again, this is a whole different opportunity. And that's where I think then looking at those folks, do they qualify to get into the lottery? And
assuming there's a lottery, because that's even a conversation.
Okay.
So, and this isn't, all of this is up for conversation, right? So if you're saying that you believe the best way to distribute 10 licenses is a lottery, then we want to make sure that we're saying that, because it hasn't been, there's nothing says that has to happen that way.
Gotcha.
So I want to make sure.
The top 10 scores.
I thought we were trying to get away from the merit-based system to avoid any more lawsuits.
Well, the policy says it has to be merit-based.
Oh.
So
I got a couple I did.
and this isn't saying, yeah, and this isn't saying that you're wrong. I just want to make sure as the people that are listening to us that they understand none of that is set in stone, right? And we have to be mindful of what the policy says. And the policy does say it has to be merit-based, but it doesn't say that has to be the deciding factor. So yeah. There could be, if that's what you're suggesting, if there is a lottery.
Yeah, and there could be, obviously different variables, and do those equal, do those add up? Do you first get to qualify to go into the lottery? I think there's pros and cons in looking at other states who've done a lottery to see how do those folks feel about it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's what I got.
One thing I think we need to be really mindful. Yeah. One thing we need to be really mindful of is the manipulation that can happen when how you formulate proof. I think it's important that we structure this to where you can validate however, whatever qualifying factors that are required to be a social equity piece, and that we really focus on how organizations have manipulated this in the past. If you look at how other states have done this, there's been a lot of manipulation. And I think, that's an important area to focus on is, having the least amount of that happening, and how can we control that and try to manage that.
Well, that's what we're here. How can we control it and try to manage that?
Well, once again, I think Dallas said, like Senator Dallas Harris said, we have to research and look at what has been working out there, and then tweaking what we can and taking from other agencies and other organizations that have done this pretty well in other areas. that's a start. We're not going to know until we start digging into it, I think, but we can. And when we do, those are the type of things we need to be thinking about on the back end as we structure those things, because I think, there's certain states that have done this better than others, and they've weeded out some of that manipulation. And, those are the type of scenarios and examples we should be looking at and seeing what the best ones are.
So what I hear you saying is we probably need to submit a study for those best practices.
I think so.
What I will say is one of the things that I would like to see is maybe in moving away, because we do have to have merit-based, because that's what the policy says. But maybe what we could do is make the merit-based more personable. I think what we could do is have a board that is scoring, a non-partisan, an all-involved community board or whatever that looks like, and they are scoring the applications, based on what is supposed to be there, and then also meeting the applicants and putting a score that way, and then taking all those scores, because I think this would take the CCB away from it, right? If we were saying, we're going to have a board of 11 community members score the applications, and based on those scores, this is the people who scored the highest based on all of these scores, instead of hiring people that will, it doesn't even matter, but we know how that could look. I think what we could do is lean, because I'm a community partner, I love my community, and I'm not just saying my community, but I think if we put a lot of this back in the hands of the community, it takes away the mystery of it, right? And it holds all persons accountable instead of just the CCB accountable. And then based on that scoring is how maybe some kind of fishbowl process happens. But instead of just saying, hey, we have these professionals and these are the ones that are going to score you and this is what it looks like, have that point, but then also a second point that says the community's taking a look at your idea and they don't like it, right? And we have 11 people that you guys chose and they don't like it and you're not moving forward, right? I think that puts, and I know it's unorthodox for sure, but I think to be quite frank, what has been happening hasn't been working across nation, right? Everyone keeps suing, and I believe that comes from not having an opportunity to be at arm's length, and bringing the community into the process could put the CCD board at that arm's length. And I know it's unorthodox by all means, but unorthodox sometimes is how we win. So, that's kind of what I've been thinking. I'm like, I don't know why we're tripping about this. Get that crap back to the community, hold them accountable to that. That's what I think. And then, because then what happens is now you're not just suing. Now you can't come back and sue me for what I said. They can't sue me. I'm just advising. But, you can't sue me. You blame your community for how you scored. They didn't like it. I don't know what to tell you. You know what I'm saying? I think that there's a space for that. Of course.
It's a great idea, Chair Goins. I think it's a great idea because the cannabis industry and cannabis consumers had already proved to the community that we can practice responsible adult use. We've broken stereotypes, stigmas. We've got all types of new consumers who probably replaced cannabis with something much more destructive. So I think the community would be grateful to be involved. And then with how many ideas I think that are going to be coming from entrepreneurs, if you want to go into my district, District 9, then you might have to present in front of some folks in the community who say, I'd love to be involved in that. I think it's a great idea. And I also think any form of lying, a loss of integrity, serious ramifications, like you're done.
Yep, I agree. So just, I agree. Anything else, Member Ogden, you want to add?
No, I think we got a little ways to go before we get to the scoring, but I feel like structuring this, what makes a social applicant, what, all those things we talked about are going to be first, getting through that, and then trying to realize, then getting to this point, I think is how it has to go, but so no, I think just going through the process.
And to that, let's talk about what is equitable. And it's a hard conversation to have as we're talking about the consumption lounges and we're talking about how we identify applicants. I want this subcommittee, I'm going to ask now broadly, this absolutely will be an action item for next meeting, but what do we consider is equitable? And this relates to, you have a social equity applicant, and we have identified through other industries, how to identify those markers. And now we are saying there's an application process that's available. How much of that application says that that person is an equitable applicant? I stutter and I take my time because this whole conversation makes me nervous. But we have to talk about it. It is, something that we will be asked to advise on. And so right now, right here, I want to know what you guys are thinking. How much of an application of that social equity applicant makes them equitable?
Well, one thing that I didn't like, and I'm sorry to just start talking about it at a turn. I don't know if you, but
no, please, Member Ogden, please.
One thing I don't love, and this is just me in my opinion, is when the weight of board members or people who are not owners had on applications in the past. As someone who applied as a minority owner, I got the same scoring as someone who put a bunch of minorities on their board as a manipulation tactic, who saw no parts of this industry after they got the license, and we were weighed the same. And when it came to scoring, I think it's really important to determine if those things are going to be a factor. What all is on the application, what's required for it. Are those type of things required for the application? Do you need board members? Do you need support team? And are those, do those have weight on the scoring? And if so, just making sure that personally, I think nothing should weigh more than an actual owner who has equity in this, and then whatever percentage we determine that to be. I personally think 51%, I think it should be majority minority owned, to have, that designation. That's just me personally, and putting things in place so that can't be manipulated on the back end.
So, Member Ogden, what you're saying is that we should be allocating ownership as equity applicants. Those owners are social equity applicants, and it should be 50+1.
I think that's my opinion. Of course, I'm open to a discussion. It's not set. It's just something that I like more when I see the structure like that, as I look across the nation and see what other people have been doing. I know, like I said before, our early application process, we had board members, and that's it, and that's how some people got away with it, even though there was no social equity piece in a sense. It was very lightly, it was there, but it wasn't there. So I just think that's important, because once again, as you become this owner and you get into this industry and years go down the line, you still need support, you need help. And how do we determine who those people are if everybody who really owns it is not a minority or disenfranchised individual, or whatever the case may be? They're on a board, they're on the back end, and they're really not seeing the benefits of this. They're not getting the benefits of what we're trying to do here.
What are we thinking?
I think we might want to look at this in two pieces. One, do you meet the definition of a social equity applicant? Whatever that may be that we discuss, right? And I think there's room to say social equity applicant is 50+ plus one ownership or 60% board members, right? Or, it doesn't necessarily, maybe we can make like a higher barrier for that, because I think just generally as a public policy objective, I'd like to see more minorities on boards too.
Okay.
Although I do in fact understand, the ownership point. So I think there's a way to make a distinction without saying it has to be one or the other. Right?
Okay.
Maybe we require a little bit more, but we can still offer some incentive, right? So the first thing is, do you then meet that definition, right? And then we come up with the issue of, if we have more than 10 people who meet the definition, what do we do?
Okay.
Right. And that may be where we have to really get into those community discussions to score the applications, take a look at the plans, and some of that more granular assessment. Not to say we don't do that even if we have less than 10, because we want to make sure we're putting out the best, right? Maybe we only decide 5 people or 5 applications are worth giving licenses to at this time, and that's totally warranted as well. But I think we should take it in a 2-step process. Do you meet the standard barrier, social equity applicant? Now we can get you into the door, and then have a further discussion about whether you are qualifying for the 10 licenses after that.
So what I hear you saying is that, because there are 20 licenses, independent licenses made available.
Okay.
And what you're saying is those are just the independent licenses as a whole. What I hear you saying is that people should just apply for the licenses, and then we decide if these licensees are social equity applicants. Because I've been thinking of it in the space of those applicants would specifically apply for social equity available licenses. But what I hear you saying is, no, they should just be applying for the independent licenses, and then we decide what the criteria is for them to be SE applicants.
Actually, I'm actually thinking the same way you are.
Okay.
Let's start off with the premise. We've got 10 applications set aside for social equity applicants.
Yes. Okay.
But the question I'm trying to answer is, how do we assess those applicants?
Yes.
And then and I'm suggesting the first step,
Yes.
actually, to assessing those applications is, do you meet the definition?
Okay. Right.
Right. And then we can move on to whatever other filtering criteria we want to meet if necessary, right? If there are more than 10.
And so you're saying that would qualify them point-wise, merit-wise.
Right, like, okay,
Yes,
so
okay.
yes, you are a social equity applicant.
Yes.
We have determined that by the definition that we advise the CCB to put into place,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
You meet it. Okay, checks step 1.
Yes.
Right? That's a filtering process.
Yes.
So I'm suggesting a 2-step kind
Yes.
of filter to look at these applications as people put themselves forward.
Okay. Yes. And that makes sense. I like that.
And kind of even playing off that is, let's say you don't know if you qualify and you have 2 different costs associated with 2 different applications.
Mm-hmm.
So even a pre-screen process, so that you know, what do I apply for? That definitely helps everybody on the board, already vetting them, as you said. So I think that will help set people up for success. And then okay, I didn't apply for this, but I'm going to apply for this, and now it costs this. Also, back to what Member Ogden said about the 51% weight. This is also setting them up for success and sustainability, so they're not manipulated by somebody that's an owner. I witnessed this firsthand, being in the industry on the second round of licenses. I knew somebody that was a Hispanic gentleman, worked in cultivation, and they put him on the application because it looked better. He had absolutely no business on the board, never been on the board, and it was pure manipulation. So I definitely agree with the 51% and other metrics, like you said, Senator.
So I'd like to put that, have that added to the next agenda, is to just kind of really talk about that. And because the reason why all of these are discussions and not hard movement is because I really wanted to offer us an opportunity to communicate openly about all of what has to be discussed, because I think it's important that conversation, that we temperature each other, right? And to see, and that also the community that is watching, that they can see what we're thinking and how we're thinking about it in wholly. And then I wanted to move forward with some action items, and, you know, some hard action items so that we can get some things done. But for many of us, this is the first time that we've been able to openly converse about this in a way that we know that it is going to move the agenda forward. And so I didn't want to put anything hard. I wanted to say, let's have this conversation so that we can think these things through, what we're all thinking, and then come back and say, here's the action items. This is what we're thinking. Let's make some conclusive decisions that we want to recommend. And so that's the reason why this is flowing this way. I appreciate all of what you said, and I think it all matters. And so I definitely want to take that into consideration for the next meeting. One of the last things that I have is, what does sustainability look like as it relates to the Nevada cannabis lounges? And this is important because what we don't want is, so according to the policy, they only have to have the license for 2 years. And then after that, they can, the license is available. Senator Harris looked up at me. And so, you know, that doesn't create a sustainable model. But what I'd like to talk about is, let me say what I'm thinking. This is the first time I'm going to say what I'm thinking first, right? So what I was thinking is, you know, the policy already says that if they're not consumption lounge, if the social equity applicant is not a consumption lounge, let me say that. The social equity applicant is the social equity applicant. And if, you know, that license is always an SE license. I don't know how that's going to be interpreted as it relates to if I've had the license for 2 years and I want to sell it. If I've had the license for 2 years and I want to give it back, I don't know how that is interpreted. But what I do want to talk about is, what does that 2 years look like? And I don't expect anything concrete, but I do want to just talk about, as Member Ogden has said, we want to make sure that we're thinking about these 2 years. And what do we do with this applicant, or what can we provide for the application process so that they can make it through their 2 years? So because we want sustainability, that is an issue across the nation. Sustainability as social equity applicants is an issue. And I want us to be different. And so I want us to be thinking about that. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think we hit on it a little bit earlier when we were talking about that continued education piece to it, and how important that is, that you don't just give them a license and say, have a good day, right? Yeah. If we continue to educate and cultivate and make sure these people want to stay in the industry, then they're going to come back and say, yeah, let me get my license again, and I want to stay, and I like what I'm doing.
Can we make that a requirement? Can we make that a part of the requirements for the application, that you have to do CE classes throughout
I think
to maintain your application?
Funding, if they're getting any funding, if there's any grants or funding that they're receiving, then I think absolutely, as part of funding requirements. You know, support, business support out there. You know, people put in programs like we just got, you know, there's websites on other programs that are out there to help people sustain startup companies, you know, things like that. I think that education piece doesn't have to be required for everybody if they're not getting money. But I think if you are getting money, or you get some type of, you know, support there, you should be able to, you should have to take those.
So we're considering that a social equity applicant, if they're getting support for that license, that leaves the CCB out of the loop. I would like a temperature check. Like, I want that social equity applicant to be accountable. Not, let me say it differently, because that's the wrong word. I want to ensure that the CCB is holding themselves accountable to this applicant being successful. I think that's what creates a strong equity program.
I think one thing that we can do is make sure that we allow these licensees to have the opportunities to create whatever kind of establishment that their dream is. And a lot of that will involve food and beverage. I think that was a huge plus to the bill. to make additional income. I remember in the last meeting for the public health and safety, they were talking about should food be packaged. One member said no, the intent was for food to be prepared on site. Obviously, if you're serving packaged food, you're not going to be making a lot of revenue. So making sure that folks see whatever sustainable business is right now here in the market, add cannabis to it, and not putting so many regulations around it where, nope, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. You know, already setting them up. Well, what are we going to do here? So that I think is very important. Workshops, as we already said, licenses go back to the state if somebody cannot, if their business cannot function and stay open and produce revenue.
I want to pause there, but does that mean that they can't sell it? Because according to the license,
Yeah.
I'm just,
Yeah.
we don't have to say this today, right? But I want you to be considering what the policy says.
Yeah.
So
I don't think they should be able to sell it if they can't run the business before 2 years.
okay.
Now, that's where you kind of get in the question of, so let's say if after 2 years they want to sell it. I see it kind of two ways. If we restrict them and say you can only sell it to another equity applicant, you could be oppressing that person from making more money, and then maybe they don't feel that's fair, that they should be able to sell that to whoever they want to, and now that person becomes more wealthy and they continue their journey on in business. And that's where it's like, how much should the government say what you can and cannot do with your business? But I do think there could be an incentive where if you then sell it to another equity applicant, you possibly pay a reduction in taxes, fees, so that we're encouraged to keep the momentum going. But, you know, we also don't want to hold people back from making a lot of money, and they were successful.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I think is important to this discussion that I don't think we've mentioned yet is, and maybe this is outside the scope, so I hope the DAG isn't listening too closely, is building a pipeline, right? When you're talking about sustainability, if we're giving these licenses to folks and they're, able to become successful, I have no problem making it a requirement that they reach back down the ladder, right?
Agreed.
Or that I think we need to be making sure, that while we're focusing on diversifying the industry, that we're also similarly focused on cultivating the next generation to be able to be successful coming into the industry. And then you have a deep bench, that it's not difficult to find another social equity applicant who might want a license, right? If we don't, do the work on the front end, then the sustainability piece, I think, becomes much more difficult. I think there are a couple of great examples of this already happening. There are unions who are doing apprenticeship programs in this area. They hopefully are focused on minority applicants in their training. And so maybe there's a lot of avenues to kind of really think holistically about this to make sure that it continues to grow and develop over time.
I agree. Member Ogden?
I agree. I think you hit it right on the head, of what you're thinking, and I think that we're all, have great synergy with how we're looking at this, and all the research we know we got to look into and find the best practices and things. And I think, I think it's good.
I agree. I'm going to move on to agenda number 5, and that is action items for our next meeting. The next meeting is not scheduled. However, there are a few things I want to make sure that we are looking into for our next meeting, and I will follow up with the staff here who has just lovingly been helping me. I so appreciate you all. I couldn't do this without you. You make me look good. Thank you. But so action items for the next meeting is we will be talking about the application and what the designation should be. I want to make sure that we're talking about that, and then for recommendation. And then also what is an equity applicant for the next meeting? And then those will be the two action items. And I do realize that we wanted to petition a study for other industries. I'm hoping I can get that done before we have the next meeting, so we can talk about those designations to decide what we want to ask the advisory commissions to vote on. Any questions about that? No? You guys want to add anything to the next action items?
I'll make 2 suggestions if I can.
Yes.
And what you will, Chair.
Yes.
One thing we may want to think about is categories of recommendations we're going to make.
Yes.
So we've already got 2, right? What's the application going to look like? So that's one category of recommendations. Number 2, what is the definition of social equity? That is a category of recommendations we're going to make. So maybe we want to think about, here are the buckets we're going to look at.
Okay.
And then look at the buckets, right? And then that will kind of help make it easier to produce a report and say, here are recommendations pertaining to issue number 1. Here are recommendations pertaining to issue number 2. And then the second thing I'd like to be able to hopefully talk about, and I keep leaning on the DAG heavily today, I hope he doesn't hate me, is to really look at our scope of authority.
Okay.
Because I'll be honest, I want to push this to everything the CCB is doing as much as possible. I know we're here about consumption lounges, but as you know, we discussed earlier, social equity is built into the CCB's mission. And so if there's any way that we as this advisory board can make recommendations that maybe happen to creep out into what the CCB does generally, I would hope we'd be able to maybe word them in a particular way, or, you know, maybe push that envelope a little bit.
But that is what this advisory board is for.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And, you know, just to say this again, that's what this advisory board is for, is to make recommendations. It's just that the chain of command is that the subcommittee
Goes to the.
yes, the subcommittee makes recommendations to the CAC. The CAC votes on those, and those recommendations then go to the Cannabis Compliance Board.
I want to see how broad can we get?
Yes, that's a good thing.
Oh, there it is. Look at
Sorry, yeah, no, I just wanted to chime in and say I think that's, you know, completely fair, and I don't mean to circumvent the discussion at all. Just want to make sure for open meeting law purposes that we're just sticking to the agenda item that's listed there. But, you know, within the scope of diversity and inclusion, this board, you know, or this subcommittee has the ability to really have a wide range of discussion on these topics. We just have to agendize them properly. So I think if board members have things they want to discuss, just let Amber know, and staff will put it, you know, on the agenda at the chair's, you know, authorization, because the chair is in charge of the agenda. But, you know, we can, you know, have a lot of things that are just related to equity and inclusion and diversity. We just have to make sure we agendize it, and then that's that.
Thank you very much. So we are now moving to agenda item 6, and it is public comment. And I'm just going to ask that you, if you want public comment, we just ask that you come to this space right here and limit your public comment to 2 minutes, please.
2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Well, that's kind of unfair.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Oh, my
Okay.
apologies.
Let me just say-
For everybody.
Yeah, 2 for everybody.
That's
But there's only 2 of us,
yeah.
all right? My name is Ignacio Soria. I'm the founder of Can & Co. We're a pre-revenue startup. We've been working to get in the industry for 3 years. I'm a first-generation Mexican-American. I'm a retired Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel, spent 24 years. I'm service disabled. You think that type of resume might break into the market and there'd be plenty of access to capital. That's not the case. My concern with the social equity program, our company put $100,000 as a company into getting into a social equity program in a large state west of here, in a very big city, probably the biggest in the state. And the lessons learned are just endless. The social equity applicants, they have 1,700 qualified applicants. Right? When the city looked at that, they realized they didn't have the capacity themselves to process those folks and do justice to the due diligence that's required to keep them within the box, the framework that you ultimately will establish and recommend. So I think you have to think about that you may have 10 licenses, but what if you get 1,000 applicants? Then you're in trouble as a state and as a municipality potentially on how you're going to process that. That's one. The application process, extremely lengthy. We paid consultants lots of money to help us compete to win. We were competing against, the MedVens of the world and these types of companies that have lots of capital. We were able to get investors, came in. Some of the regulations that the city put in, like the social equity applicant had to live in a certain zip code, was wrong to begin with. I think you both, all three of you have touched, and all four of you actually, have touched on a lot of the key elements of ensuring that we're casting a wide enough net in social equity programs to have a positive effect on the community, not on individuals. I think individuals, is definitely a wrong formula for making people successful, allowing people to succeed in an environment where they otherwise wouldn't. So the idea that you have a social equity applicant and they bring 3-4 of them along into the business somehow has to be thought thoroughly through. I mean, there's just too much opportunity there. We were working in another state, east of here, and they're the first ones that had recreational cannabis on the books. Social equity applicants there. We've been working to seek out these social equity applicants, but then they're coming online to issue more licenses. And they knowingly are going to issue these, and I'm going to use the word lottery, but it's not in the same context that you're thinking. Because, by the way, lottery system disincentivizes someone like me to go and get an investor to drop $1 million into a store that we're not going to have full a 51% owner or greater percentage of the store. So that's a disincentivizer as far as I'm concerned when you're looking at the community. But back to that lottery concept is the individuals are being afforded licenses, but they immediately know if they put them on the market, they're sold for $1 million, right? $1 million sale instantly to become millionaires. They just won the lottery, but they did nothing for them. They'll go, who knows how they're gonna employ that money for themselves or for their communities. I think that somewhere some thought has to be put into that mechanism. I think the two-year timeline is kind of a way to keep them in and have them reap the benefits of understanding how to run a business. But when it comes to capitalizing these businesses, there has to be although I can bring investors to the table and drop money into these folks, they have to know how to run the business. They got to know that if you're going to allow consumption, which of other things, because we have a cannabis and coffee concept, so that's our service component to our concept. And when we come with that, we're looking at easily spending over $1 million to $1.5 million on a store. So that is the immediate impact these social equity. If the assumption is these social equity folks have access to capital, I would say it's probably a bad assumption. So it's how do you pair them up with the industry folks that are working, or people that have access to capital, without going down the same road and having the same winners over and over again in the state. We got to reach out and let other companies participate and have them bring capital and allow them to win as a team. And then I think the program stands on better footing. I know somebody said, let's go out and do, some benchmarking perhaps on successful cities or states that have, but I dare you to tell me one that's successful at this point. Social equity has just been a disaster at this point. So appreciate your time and thanks for giving me more than 2 minutes.
Thank you for your comment.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, do I just start?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Timothy Eliado. I'm the founder of Chemo Barrio, which is a cannabis tech startup. Basically, initially we're doing internal and external business financial analysis. Just to touch a few on just to basically share some of my recommendations for the community. I have expressed during the previous legislative session that unfortunately, up to today, there still isn't any proven profitable model for this consumption lounge of social equity. I guess discussion that we have going on right now at this moment. So, and that is to me the most important issue that we need to address, because can I take the mask off, or I keep the mask off to speak? I don't know. Okay, all right. Excuse me for that. Yeah, because I mean, primarily as the first personal color in the state that ran a local nonprofit that was sponsored by the U.S. Penn Foundation, I could attest from firsthand that the biggest issue I had with the pipeline to this industry was access to capital. And I watched my colleagues that had overnight formed MSOs, and they were able to raise funding, and they were able to basically establish their businesses, and some of us got left behind. That's the main reason why I will forever advocate that we need to establish a real pipeline and a real sustainability, route to some sort of social economic empowerment for those that were marginalized or disenfranchised from this industry. Short term, I wanted to, earlier, you did indicate that you did some homework. And it's also always good to issue out homeworks. Well, I have some homeworks to issue out too. And I would like to address that based on your comment that that there should be a category of recommendation for the social equity. First, that has to do with definition. We get that. And, you know, with being an applicant only 51% based on residence conviction, yes, there's been lots of experience from other states that we could learn from and pick up the best and leave the ones that did not work behind. Also, social equity goals, and it should be also defined very well. Increasing the number of retailer licenses held by social equity applicants from disproportionately impacted areas. And we should also have another category for social equity plan. And that's where goes with our business plans involving partnerships or assistance to organizations with residents in connection with populations with a history of higher rates of enforcement and cannabis prohibition. And also establishing that has to be a workforce, you know, technical training that also aids that pipeline. I'm
gonna give you just 30 more seconds. I've given you 3.5 minutes. Well, you got 30 more seconds. You got, oh, okay. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you state your name, please, sir?
Yes, my name is Sal Ali. I'm basically here speaking on behalf of the social equity licenses and consumption lounge licenses that are coming. First thing I want to say is, like, thank you guys so much for what you're doing right now. Nevada really needs this conversation to happen. And I'm just very grateful that the CCB is considering these regulations and being more inclusive in our industry, because speaking as someone who is one of the few minority business owners in the cannabis industry here in Nevada, it's one of the most toughest, hardest experiences I've ever been through in my life. And to now see that you guys are looking at offering assistance and ongoing things that I didn't have when I started in this industry, it's desperately needed. I don't want to see people who look like we came from the same areas that I came from go through the same hardships. You know, so I don't want to see, one of the biggest things where I'm thinking with ongoing education is compliance. Like, we need to be making sure these people know the rules 100%, because speaking as someone who's gotten hit for compliance, it's one of the hardest things you ever have to go through. And it could literally ruin your business and devastate your business overlooking certain things that are required by the state. And I don't want to see anybody have to go through that. And if we can prevent that, let's do what we can to prevent those situations. When we're talking about funding, right, there's, in essence, anytime you put license caps in place, there's always going to be, the sharks are always going to come out, right? Because there's only a certain number of licenses that are available. So you're going to be looking at predatory lending practices. You're going to be looking at people being set up as puppets for bigger corporations and other people who are going to try to get these licenses. So what are we going to do to prevent that from happening? Just on the definition of item 9, the way it is for social equity right now, the way it's defined is going to put us in the same scenario as what happened when Ms. Ogden was saying before on the last dispensary round application. Because I can speak to that myself. I've seen multiple groups just put on minorities as puppets on their boards so they could meet the diversity portion of the application. And a board member can easily be removed and taken off. Being a board member doesn't necessarily mean anything, because that person can be removed, they don't have any ownership. So we have to consider that as well. So the way the definition is written right now, it says, in order to qualify as social equity applicant, you have to be an owner or an officer. That officer thing right there can be like, okay, so the CFO is a minority, but there's no minority ownership, but they qualify because he's an officer of the company. Another thing we have to consider too is one of the biggest things that's happening all over the country is when someone gets issued is applying for a license, we shouldn't be making them require them to have the real estate already. Because now they're paying rent, they're buying a spot, they're putting themselves in a real tough position just to apply for the application.
30 more seconds, sir.
So there should be a conditional application where you get it conditionally applied, then you can go out and find your location. Application stacking, that's gonna be another big thing. You're gonna have groups that are gonna come in and put in 50 or 100 applications. You know what I mean? So there should be, ownership should be, you shouldn't be able to have ownership in more than one license. And an applicant shouldn't be able to apply for more than 1 or 2 licenses, because what's gonna happen is, especially if you have some sort of lottery, they're gonna stack the lottery. They're gonna put 100 applications in the lottery.
Can I get your final?
Yeah, my final thing is this. Social equity is not charity. We're not looking for charity. We're looking for a level playing field. We're looking for a way for us to be able to play on the same field as everybody else and not start from way behind. We want to start from the same position.
Thank you for your comments, sir.
Thank you. One last thing is management contracts. A lot of these people are just going to put in management contracts with bigger corporations where they take over the whole company through a management service agreement.
Thank you for your comment.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Timothy McCoy. I am new to the space of the cannabis market. I come from a background of about 25 years in Hollywood as a production management. And I am very interested in this space. This is something that I've been dreaming about since I moved here to Nevada a few years ago. And the social equity part is very up my alley. I do think that, as you said, there are going to be a lot of barriers to making this fair for people. I think one of my suggestions on making things fair for the 10 applicants who will be allowed to do this is 51% ownership and operation. You have to be the operator, as opposed to just somebody who's a corporation who is licensees out for public people, as you said. I think there's very few, 10 is a very small number for a million plus city, you know, and I think the ideals that you did have were very great ideals on how to make this a more socially equitable thing. And I think we do have to just really kind of And I think the application process has to be more transparent. We have no clue what we need to do, how we need to do it, what are the requirements for this, what are the requirements for capital, what are the requirements from a little guy trying to get into a situation to where he's willing to work, but unfortunately he doesn't have the same kind of capital as these major corporations who are invested into this business. So how do we make that a more equitable thing to where, and the classes on financial literacy and running a business is all great ideals. I think as a community, we do need to sit down and work out the best way so it's not just the same old people getting the same old rates every time. Thank you for you guys. I appreciate it. I have one other suggestion. I listened to the meeting on health and safety. On the food preparation, I think there should also be a culinary class for the people who are in this particular field to have to be certified in doing, on-site preparation of food with THC in it. And I think that would be a helpful way to more standardize what the recipes are and that kind of thing. Thank you very much for your time. You guys have a nice day.
Thank you for your comment. Is there anybody else with public comment? If not, I just want to say I appreciate everybody's patience and being here with us digitally and also in person. I hope that this meeting, I hope that you guys really see that we want to be involved in this process, that we're taking it seriously. And I appreciate everyone's public comment. And if, without anything else said, this meeting is adjourned.
Yeah, you got it.